Marketing exists to drive revenue. That sounds obvious, but in a world obsessed with AI tools and content calendars and channel optimization, it's a surprisingly easy fact to lose sight of. My guest today has spent more than 20 years making sure that never happens. Steve Cummins has built marketing functions at companies ranging from Japanese tech giants to crowd-funded Danish startups. He grew an entrepreneurial IT business to $75 million in revenue before it was acquired. And their own VP of sales said Steve took an unknown technology company to the point where it was recognized as the global market leader. Today, Steve works as a fractional marketing leader through his firm Solent Strategies, helping startups and B2B companies punch above their weight. He also coaches and mentors people I think about often when I make this show, marketing teams of one. What you're about to hear is a candid, honest conversation about what AI actually means for marketing teams right now. There's no hype here, there's no fear here. It's a practical reality of how a lean marketing function can use these tools to build something that lasts without handing ownership of your customers to yet another gatekeeper. Today is part one of a two-part interview with Steve Cummins. I'm Tim Peter. This is the Digital Reset Podcast. Let's dive in. So Steve Cummins, welcome to the show. I am so glad you're here. We've known each other for a long time. We've been, I think, friends for quite a while. We have enjoyed working with one another over the years, and I'm just thrilled you're here today.
Well, thanks, Tim. I would say I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller, I guess. And yes, we've been in the trenches together a few times. And you're always kind enough to answer my calls when I need some help on SEO or whatever may be the panic of the day.
Well, and vice versa. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you. It's fun that this time there's going to be an audience for it. So thanks for taking the time. So you have just the best newsletter. I love your newsletter. I read it every month. It's really great. And you wrote recently that marketing exists to drive revenue and everything else is noise. As you know, I've been making a similar argument for owned channels for years. What I'm curious about is where would you push back on me? Because I think there's a version of focus on what you own that becomes an excuse for avoiding the hard work of actually getting your content and getting your message in front of people, distribution and the like. So in your view, where does the owned channel argument break down?
Yeah, so first off, obviously that is a big oversimplification that, marketing to drive revenue. And I have to say that so I don't get in trouble with all of my friends and colleagues in marketing. Really what I'm trying to say is, look, marketing doesn't exist for its own sake, right? It doesn't exist in a vacuum. You are there to do certain things, and what it all boils down to is driving revenue. And I do think some marketers, particularly the talking heads that you see on LinkedIn, lose sight of that sometimes, and they just love to talk about marketing for marketing's own sake. I'm not pointing fingers at you, Tim, but there's people out there that do that. But to dig more into your question, where does the focus on owned break down? I think a lot of it depends on your domain or the industry you're in, right? So I know you do a lot of work in hospitality and hotels.
Yeah, sure.
So in that world, there's some very obvious places where people go on that first level of search, right? So could be Google Maps. That's often how I search when I'm looking for a hotel.
Sure.
I go into Google Maps and the listings are there. Maybe it's TripAdvisor, there's a few other places.
Yep.
Restaurants, similar kind of thing. So in that case, the earned media is sort of a given, right? You have to do it, but it's the
of course, yeah.
And then you can really focus on your owned media. Now, a lot of what I deal with is B2B tech companies.
Yep.
So let's take an example. One company I worked with, they do a fairly niche area of EdTech, educational technology, right? Something that goes into classrooms. So that first level where somebody might say, oh, I need this thing, let me go find out about it. There's not a lot of obvious places to go for that beyond good old-fashioned Google search, right? There's not a platform like Yelp or
Right. There's no TripAdvisor. Right. Yep. Sure.
So You actually have to do a lot more work first.
Probably not even G2 or things like that they don't really cover that space, I would imagine.
Absolutely. I mean, G2 is much more focused on software, right? So if you're in hardware,
right.
Industry websites, magazines is probably the closest you have for it. So you do have to do a fair amount of work on what little earned media there is out there. And then the other thing is, there's only any point in doing owned media if you can get somebody to that place.
Right? Of course.
So again, in the case of hotels, somebody finds it on Google Maps or TripAdvisor. First thing I always do is go through to the website, right?
Yep.
So immediately you're on it.
And God bless you for that.
I may be in the minority. I don't know. But again, with a tech product, how do you get somebody to your website in the first place?
Yeah.
So something like a podcast might be, right? Because people are looking to find out more about EdTech, and maybe that's how they find it. But I think it's a lot tougher to get people to owned media. So yes, you should do owned media.
Yep.
But in certain areas, particularly where it's a niche product, I think you have to do a lot more effort to build the blocks to get people to come to your owned media.
Well, and it's an educational sale, right? I mean, I would imagine for many of the kinds of things you're talking about, sometimes people don't know they have a problem in the first place, or they don't know that they've got a need they've got to address. So there's probably some work you've got to do just to get the message out of, hey, I don't know if you know you have a problem. I mean, is that a fair...
Yeah, it's something that I struggle with quite a bit, actually, because I will talk to some companies... And that's what they want to do, right? Because it's sort of marketing 101. Oh, you've got to define the problem and educate people on the problem. Yep. However, a lot of the companies I deal with are startups, and they are, in most cases, there's already somebody established in that field.
Oh,
and they found a better way of doing it, right?
Yeah.
Cheaper, smarter, whatever it may be.
Yep.
So should they really spend their time educating somebody on the problem, when in reality, they're probably only going to get found if somebody is looking at the bigger players in that field and then are looking for, is there a better way of doing this? So rather than trying to explain and solve the big problem, what I would then tell them to do is focus on the thing, on the part of the problem that you solve, right? So, because there's other people out there, frankly, with much bigger budgets that are going to talk about the bigger pie. So really focus in on that one bit, and maybe that's how you get people to the website, because then, it's more of that longer tail type search where somebody's saying, so I'll use the EdTech example again, right? So somebody knows that they need a screen share widget for their classrooms.
Yep.
So they go out there, there's 2 or 3 big players out there, those are the people they find, but actually they've got this one problem, and this one problem is that, it's very difficult to switch between Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, Skype, right? We're just still using
Sure.
And that's actually the thing that this company is really good at. So you spend your time focusing on that, so that when somebody starts searching, okay, I know these are the 3 people, but this is really the problem I have. That's the bit that you've really got to get shot.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I actually, me, I collect pithy phrases from all over the place. And one of the ones I talk about all the time is your toughest competitor is inertia, right? Your toughest competitor is people doing what they've always done. And that's true if you're a big guy, and it's certainly true if you're a small person. The analogy I would use in this case from the hospitality industry is when you work with independent hotels, you certainly don't have to educate people on what a hotel is, obviously. But getting them to understand, why would I stay with this interesting little, 30-room boutique property in the city center versus the Marriott where I get my points and things like that. They've done the heavy lifting of letting people know hotels exist. Right? You know what I mean? But, why this hotel becomes the bigger challenge, right? Yeah. So that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and I think it's the whole status quo thing, right? So another pithy phrase used to be, you never get fired for choosing IBM. Doesn't make sense to people, but back in the day, right? That used to be a thing.
Right.
Now it's probably, you don't get fired for running on AWS, right?
Right.
So yes, that's the thing that you're trying to overcome for sure.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So you mentioned a client in one of your newsletters whose in-house marketer is now shipping code. And I'm hearing similar stories of folks who actually building things hands-on, vibe coding themselves and the like, right? And I do a fair bit of that myself. At many of the companies you work with, because they're startups or because they're early stage or because they're a smaller player in a much bigger ecosystem, the marketing team might be one person, right? And I think that's something a lot of people who listen to the show can relate to. How do you figure out where AI actually figures out? If you are that one person, how do you figure out where AI fits into your day-to-day? And I'm not just talking like in theory, but like today, what's the honest answer? And I'll be super transparent about this. I don't know that I have the answer yet, right? So one of the reasons I'm asking is because I want to know.
Yeah. Well, and because it's constantly changing, right? The answer I would have given you 2 months ago would have been different, and I'm sure it will be 2 months from now. So that particular instance is probably a little bit of an outlier. So they're a cybersecurity SaaS company.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Series A, right? So they're growing fast. Yep. 2/3 of their employees are software developers, right? So the whole mentality, whenever I talk to the founder, he wants to know, have I done this in Claude, right? Everything they do is in Claude.
Yeah.
So for this particular marketer, it was just expected because everybody else is doing everything in Claude, and it was expected. So I don't think that is the answer. It's not the answer right now for most marketers, and I'm not sure it's ever going to be.
Yep.
And I can talk about that in a minute. But particularly if it's a team of one, which is very common, right? And oftentimes I work with companies where they have a junior marketer who's very good at the doing.
Yep.
And then I get involved to sort of help them with the planning and the strategy and what have you. So if you have a team,
that's why we get along, because we actually deal with that. That's pretty common in both our worlds, right? So anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Right, but you need that layer between we're doing a lot of things, and are we doing the right things, and
totally
moving forward. So if you're a team of one, first off, you probably don't have the time to work out how to start coding stuff and ship it and all of that, unless you're in a software forward company. What I encourage people to do, I think there's probably 3 ways you can look at AI at the moment. The first is pretty much every software program platform that you use is rolling out AI functionality. So the simplest way to start using AI and benefiting from AI is, whether it's HubSpot, MailChimp, whatever it is you're using, Canva,
Word, right?
They all have AI built. Some is good, some is not so good. But that's the first thing. Play around with that because it's already in your stack. You already know how you're using it, and it's probably there to help with your workflows. You and I are recording this on a platform called Riverside. Every week they're rolling out new AI things that make the editing process easier. So
100%.
Every marketer can do that. It's typically included in your existing subscription. So that's the first thing to do. Second thing is, and I'm less keen on this, is there are a lot of standalone AI tools out there that will tell you, we've developed this AI from the ground up. This is going to solve your problem. Not a big fan of those because A, they're still in their development cycle. So you may spend a lot of time effectively helping them make their product better. B, a lot of them will go away. They will get bought out, disappear, whatever, and you've just built your stack on that. So, if you're interested, play around with it on the side, but do not build your processes on these, platforms that have only been around for 3 months. And as I'm saying it, I apologize to any of my clients that might actually have those products right now. But I actually think the big thing and what I'm playing around with a lot at the moment is agentic tools, right? So I'm a big fan of Claude Cowork. And I think for a lot of people, when they think of ChatGPT or Claude, they think about the chatbots, right? You go in, you ask a question, it helps you write, and that's all very valuable, particularly for a marketer of one. But Claude Cowork actually helps you run tasks, right? So a real simple case, 2 days ago, I was working with a client. We're building out an ABM program for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And very simple. I was building a list of potential targets, and I realized that I hadn't filled out the column that had their LinkedIn page on.
Yeah.
So I just put it into Cowork. And if you haven't used Cowork, what you realize is you just speak English to it. You just say, hey, I have this table. I need to fill in column B with LinkedIn pages.
Yeah.
And off it goes and does it. And as far as I could see, there were no mistakes. There was 4 or 5 that it couldn't find, and then I went and found it. So start simple, right? And I think Claude Cowork is $20 a month. Hopefully your company will pay for it.
That's what I'm paying. Yeah. And that's the version I use.
$20
exactly.
a month, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully your company will pay for it. If not, pay for it yourself. I mean, really, for $20. So that would be my thing. Is first thing, features that are in your current stack, and second, invest in Claude Cowork. They all have similar things. I just think Claude Cowork is probably the best and easiest to use right now.
I completely agree with that, by the way. And while this episode is not brought to you by Anthropic and Claude, it could be if anybody out there is listening and wants to, throw us a check.
Sure.
No, I'm kidding.
The other thing I'll say, the other thing I'll say on that, a lot of people are very worried that they're getting left behind on AI, right?
Yeah.
I think you and I have talked about this before. And,
Yep.
and I have a couple of answers to that. First is, you probably are, because we all are. It's just impossible to keep up. But the other thing I will say, and there was a really good chart published about this a few weeks ago. If you have a paid subscription to any of the AI tools, you're in the top 10% of all users. And if you have paid to 2 AI tools, you're in the top, I think, 1% or something crazy. So if you are playing around with it, if you are doing stuff with it, you're already ahead of the game. And I think you just got to keep at it.
I'm very fond of telling people, don't compare your insides to other people's outsides, right? We run into this all the time. I do work with the conference board, the Digital Marketing Strategy Council there, and we get together a group of digital marketers at Fortune 500 companies once a quarter or thereabouts to have conversations about what's top of mind for them. And invariably what we find is that, person A on the council, when we're talking about a specific topic, will be so far behind the average in the room. And then you go to another topic, and they are so far ahead of the average in the room, right? Nobody's good at everything. You just have to accept the fact that there's things you're going to be better at, there's things you're going to be worse at. Don't let the things that you're worse at be, a hole you fall into, or, that distract you from what you should be working on. You're probably working on the right things most of the time, right?
Yeah, I think it's true. And I tell you, LinkedIn is the worst for that, right? I mean, if you, and I do spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, more than I should. But if you
same, by the way,
if you truly believed what everybody told you they were doing on LinkedIn in terms of AI, you'd think you're a Luddite compared to it. But people talk a good game, and to your point, they may just be very focused on that one aspect of it.
Right. Which kind of leads to the next question I wanted to ask you, because you have talked quite a bit about do a few things really well. I have talked about own the channels that you build on. And to me, those kind of feel like they're the same argument, or there's a lot of overlap there, right? Fish where the fishing's good, double down on, where your opportunities are, things like that. At the same time, I have used people who I consider fairly smart use focus as a reason to go deep on a rented platform. We're going to be on Instagram, we're going to be on LinkedIn, we're going to be on whatever that channel is, whatever's working right now and the like. So how do you help your clients, how do you help people you talk to distinguish between genuine focus and just, doubling down on someone else's real estate, just building your brand on rented land and the obvious risks that entails? Yeah,
so I think it is a challenge. There's a fine line between focusing on a few things and going deep into 2 or 3 things, right? So when I say to people, you've got to focus on 1 or 2 things, what I'm trying to avoid is spreading yourself so thin and trying to do so many things that basically you end up doing a lot of things not very well, right?
Yeah.
So my thing more is about pick 2 or 3 things that you think you can have an impact on, that you have an interest in, because I think it helps if you're interested in these things. Get very good at them and be consistent with them. But once you get to that level, and I don't know what it is, let's say it's the 90% level, then you pick the fourth thing and the fifth thing, right?
Yeah.
So you're constantly adding to the stack. So I think it's diminishing returns to go deeper.
Yeah.
It's sort of that T-shaped thing, right? Get very good at 2 or 3 things, but then broaden out. And I think part of this came from, my corporate career before I started consulting. Typically, I would join a company early on when there was maybe 1 or 2 marketers, and we would grow the company. And if you're in that growth environment, the nice thing is, if you take that approach, if you get very good at 1 or 2 things, then you get to hire somebody to take those things over and maintain, let's say, and iterate. Meanwhile, you can move on to the 4th thing and the 5th thing.
Yeah.
So, I'm not a fan of going deep. Whenever I'm talking to a new client or someone who's asking me for help, so I always do this first tier audit. You probably do the same thing, right? So I go look at their website and go.
Right.
And one of the things I always get, I scroll down to the bottom to look at their social icons.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Where are you telling your potential customers to go find out about you? And the number of people that I find that have 5 or 6 icons on there.
Right.
They're on LinkedIn and Twitter and Blue Sky and TikTok and all this. And then you go and click on each one of them. And the only thing they posted on there was 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
Yeah,
but you'll find one. You don't know what it is. It could be LinkedIn, could be YouTube, where they are very active. And so then it's an easy conversation. Say, look, you thought you would be able to handle 4 or 5 of these things. Yeah. Let's get rid of those other icons. Let's get really good at the one you're already active on. And when we think we're ready with that, then let's go to the second one. So, I think you have to have that honest conversation. The other thing that I always laugh at is why they picked that one thing. Right? Why did they decide that TikTok is going to be the thing for them? And sometimes it's rational. It's very industry dependent.
Yep.
I worked with a company. It was actually really interesting. They had multiple businesses. One of them is hotels, and the other is a tax and or tax advisory business. Right?
Oh, sure.
Very different.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
So I'm having my call with them. And they have a junior marketer who's working on the hotel side of the business, and she'd just been brought over to the advisory side as well. And she's telling him, we've really got to do a lot on Facebook to get this. Now they're trying to bring in high net worth individuals, right, to come in and do their tax advisory. You're not going to find those people on Facebook,
right?
But for this marketer, it was sensible for her. They've been very successful with the hotel, with Facebook, so therefore we're going to do that on the other one. So you also have to be very thoughtful about once you decide you're only going to do 2 or 3 things, you may not find the perfect things to do, but at least make sure that they are logical.
Right. It's so funny you say this. I see this all the time for all kinds of businesses. And, why do we do it? Well, because our competitors do it, right? Or why do we do it? Because it's the thing that the marketer happens to like personally, right? It's their preferred social network or things like that. And plenty who do it for very rational reasons of we've done the research and our customers are there and things like that. But I love the I love the way you're thinking about focus. I had to look it up. I apologize, but I couldn't remember the source of the phrase, but there's a phrase my dad used to use all the time about the guy who jumped on his horse and rode off madly in all directions, and why, right?
Yeah.
And now that kind of doesn't work out,
There's a lot of that. You see, I have a lot of books behind me. So one of my favorite books is a book called Range, and it was sort of ahead of its time. I can't remember the name of the author, but
that's okay. That's what Google's for.
I'll share it with you. Yeah, exactly. But it's called Range, and he talks about it's very trendy and very popular to be a specialist at something. But he's done a lot of research into this idea that actually you're much better off, at least early on in your career, being very broad and learning a lot of things. And then over time, you can specialize into certain areas. But I've always thought of myself as a generalist. And I got to say, most of my career that has worked against me. Because people that generally are looking to hire a SEO specialist or a social media person or a video person, And my thing has always been, well, I get bored easily. I like doing a bunch of different things. So I want to be able to turn my hand to whatever is the thing that is needed, which is honestly why I've worked with a lot of small companies and startups, because in that environment, you have to do that anyway. So
right, being able to wear a lot of different hats, knowing what hats to wear in the first place is actually a valuable skill, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I realize I didn't answer part of your question as well, which is the whole rented, like going deep on rented. The only thing I would say is I think for a lot of smaller companies, you have to start on rented land.
100%, yep.
But think about the content or the assets that you're creating for that rented and what can you do with it, right? So are you creating videos? Are you creating written material that can be a blog? So you may have to do it because you're posting on that rented land, but make sure that you're using those assets for something else.
If you want more from Steve, and you should, there are 2 places you can find him. First, his newsletter, The Marketing Mix, goes out every 2 weeks on Substack, where he covers B2B marketing with the kind of honest, real-world perspective you just heard today. Pro tip for you, there's a cocktail recommendation at the end of every issue. You won't want to miss it, and you'll find the link in the show notes. Steve is also on LinkedIn, as you might imagine. Just search Steve Cummins. You'll find the link to his profile in the show notes, too. And if you want to work with Steve directly, check out Solent Strategies. All the details for how you can get in touch with him are in the show notes for today's episode. Now, Steve and I only covered the first half of our conversation today. Next week, Steve and I get into something that I think is one of the most important questions in marketing right now. What happens to the people building marketing skills when AI is doing more and more of the actual work? Steve calls it the validator problem, and it's something every marketing leader needs to think about very carefully. That's part 2, coming at you next week. In the meantime, if you know somebody who's running a marketing team right now and trying to figure out where AI actually fits in their day-to-day, do me a favor, send them a link to this episode. I think it might save them a lot of time and a whole lot of second guessing. You can find the show notes for today's episode, including all of Steve's contact info, at timpeter.com/podcasts. And if you're ready to go even deeper on building a brand that customers will ask for by name, my book, Digital Reset, Driving Marketing and Customer Acquisition Beyond Big Tech, might be just what you're looking for. You'll find it on Amazon.com and bookshop.org. Links in the show notes to those, too, of course. Thank you so much for listening today. I genuinely appreciate all of your support. I would not do this show without you. Until next time, please be well, be safe, and as always, be excellent to each other. I'll see you soon.